The Time Machine, written by H.G. Wells. Read for you by Ed French. Chapter 14. The Further Vision. I have already told you of the sickness and confusion that comes with time traveling, and this time I was not seated properly in the saddle, but sideways and in an unstable fashion. For an indefinite time I clung to the machine as it swayed and vibrated, quite unheeding how I went. And when I brought myself to look at the dials again, I was amazed to find where I had arrived. One dial records days, another thousands of days, another millions of days, and another thousands of millions. Now, instead of reversing the levers, I had pulled them over so as to go forward with them, and when I came to look at these indicators, I found that the thousands hand was sweeping round as fast as the second hands of a watch, into futurity. Very cautiously, for I remembered my former headlong fall, I began to reverse my motion. Slower and slower went the circling hands until the thousands one seemed motionless, and the daily one was no longer a mere mist upon its scale. Still slower, until the gray haze around me became distincter, and dim outlines of an undulating waste grew visible. I stopped. I was on a bleak moorland, covered with a sparse vegetation and gray with a thin hoar-frost. The time was midday. The orange sun, shorn of its effulgence, brooded near the meridian in a sky of drabby gray. Only a few black bushes broke the monotony of the scene. The great buildings, of the decadent men among whom, it seemed to me, I had been so recently, had vanished and left no trace. Not a mound even marked their position. Hill and valley, sea and river, all, under the wear and work of the rain and frost, had melted into new forms. No doubt, too, the rain and snow had long since washed out the Morlock's tunnels. A nipping breeze stung my hands and face. So far as I could see, there were neither hills nor trees nor rivers, only an uneven stretch of cheerless plateau. Then suddenly a dark bulk rose out of the moor, something that gleamed like a serrated row of iron plates, and vanished almost immediately in a depression. And then I became aware of a number of faint gray things, colored to almost the exact tint of the frost-bitten soil, which were browsing here and there upon its scanty grass, and running to and fro. I saw one jump with a sudden start, and then my eye detected perhaps a score of them. At first I thought they were rabbits, or some small breed of kangaroo. Then, as one came hopping near me, I perceived that it belonged to neither of these groups. It was plantigrade, its hind legs rather the longer. It was tailless, and covered with a straight grayish hair that thickened about the head into a skye terrier's mane. As I had understood that in the Golden Age man had killed out almost all the other animals, sparing only a few of the more ornamental, I was naturally curious about the creatures. They did not seem afraid of me, but browsed on, much as rabbits would do in a place unfrequented by men, and it occurred to me that I might perhaps secure a specimen. I got off the machine and picked up a big stone. I had scarcely done so when one of the little creatures came within easy range. I was so lucky as to hit it on the head, and it rolled over at once and lay motionless. I ran to it at once. It remained still, almost as if it were killed. I was surprised to see that the thing had 5 feeble digits to both its fore and hind feet. The 4 feet, indeed, were almost as human as the 4 feet of a frog. It had, moreover, a roundish head, with a projecting forehead and forward-looking eyes, obscured by its lank hair. A disagreeable apprehension flashed across my mind. As I knelt down and seized my capture, intending to examine its teeth and other anatomical points which might show human characteristics, the metallic-looking object to which I have already alluded reappeared above a ridge in the moor, coming towards me and making a strange clattering sound as it came. Forthwith the gray animals about me began to answer with a short, weak yelping, as if of terror, and bolted off in a direction opposite to that from which this new creature approached. They must have hidden in burrows or behind bushes and tussocks, for in a moment not one of them was visible. I rose to my feet and stared at this grotesque monster. I can only describe it by comparing it to a centipede. It stood about 3 feet high and had a long, segmented body, perhaps 30 feet long, with curiously overlapping greenish-black plates. It seemed to crawl upon a multitude of feet, looping its body as it advanced. Its blunt, round head, with a polygonal arrangement of black eye spots, carried 2 flexible, writhing, horn-like antennae. It was coming along, I should judge, at a pace of about 8 or 10 miles an hour, and it left me little time for thinking. Leaving my gray animal, or gray man, whichever it was, on the ground, I set off for the machine. Halfway I paused, regretting that abandonment, but a glance over my shoulder destroyed any such regret. When I gained the machine, the monster was scarce 50 yards away. It was certainly not a vertebrated animal. It had no snout, and its mouth was fringed with jointed, dark-colored plates. But I did not care for a nearer view. I traversed one day and stopped again, hoping to find the colossus gone and some vestige of my victim. But I should judge the giant centipede did not trouble itself about bones. At any rate, both had vanished. The faintly human touch of these little creatures perplexed me greatly. If you come to think, there is no reason why a degenerate humanity should not come at last to differentiate into as many species as the descendants of the mud-fish who fathered all the land vertebrates. I saw no more of any insect colossus. As to my thinking, the segmented creature must have been. Evidently the physiological difficulty that at present keeps all the insects small had been surmounted at last, and this division of the animal kingdom had arrived at the long-awaited supremacy which its enormous energy and vitality deserve. I made several attempts to kill or capture another of the grayish vermin, but none of my missiles were so successful as my first, and, after perhaps a dozen disappointing throws that left my arm aching, I felt a gust of irritation at my folly in coming so far into futurity without weapons or equipment. I resolved to run on for one glimpse of the still remoter future, one peep into the deeper abysm of time, and then to return to you and my own epoch. Once more I remounted the machine, and once more the world grew hazy and gray. As I drove on, a peculiar change crept over the appearance of things. The palpitating grayness grew darker. Then, though I was still traveling with prodigious velocity, the blinking succession of day and night, which was usually indicative of a slower pace, returned and grew more and more marked. This puzzled me very much at first. The alternations of night and day grew slower, and so did the passage of the sun across the sky, until they seemed to stretch through centuries. At last a steady twilight brooded over the earth, a twilight only broken now and then when a comet glared across the darkling sky. The band of light that had indicated the sun had long since disappeared, for the sun had ceased to set. It simply rose and fell in the west, and grew ever broader and more red. All trace of the moon had vanished. The circling of the stars, growing slower and slower, had given place to creeping points of light. At last, some time before I stopped, the sun, red and very large, halted motionless upon the horizon, a vast dome glowing with a dull heat, and now and then suffering a momentary extinction. At one time it had for a little while glowed more brilliantly again, but it speedily reverted to its sullen red heat. I perceived by this slowing down of its rising and setting that the work of the tidal drag was done. The earth had come to rest with one face to the sun, even as in our own time the moon faces the earth. Very cautiously, for I remembered my former headlong fall, I began to reverse my motion. Slower and slower went the circling hands, until the thousands one seemed motionless, and the daily one was no longer a mere mist upon its scale. Still slower, until the dim outlines of a desolate beach grew visible. I stopped very gently, and sat upon the time machine, looking round.